Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our first in a series of webinars on the home energy rebate programs. We're just going to start with a few housekeeping announcements while everyone joins. The first is that we are recording this webinar and will make it available to everyone a few days after this webinar, early next week, and we will provide the slides to everyone who registered. Throughout the course of this webinar, we will allow and enable Q&A via the button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A, and we'll answer questions from those that are submitted towards the end of the webinar. In that Q&A function, you can also vote for questions that others have submitted, and we will try to prioritize based on those votes and other factors. You can also chat using the chat button at the bottom of your screen to connect with other participants in this webinar. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. So we just wanted to share a bit about the purpose and outcome for this webinar series at the beginning. So we will have 4 parts to this webinar series. Our goal is to support state energy offices and other stakeholders in maximizing the benefits of the home energy rebates that were funded by the Inflation Reduction Act, particularly to those who need it most. Very much thinking about those in affordable housing, low-income households who have the highest energy burdens and stand to benefit the most from a transition towards efficiency and electrification. Many of you and many of us worked very hard to get those Inflation Reduction Act funding and home energy rebates enacted. And now, going forward, we want to make sure they are implemented most effectively and equitably. To that end, with each one of these webinars, we'll highlight a different aspect of best practices to maximize the benefits of these funding programs for those low-income households and affordable housing, as well as the workers and communities that have been most overburdened and underserved in our communities across the country. We hope that you will take these recommendations and enact them and support them as state energy offices roll out these home energy rebates. You should also feel free to follow up with any of us to get more support for your state energy office, for your state, for your community as we go forward in this process. Feel free to look ahead at the next few webinars by checking out the full series. We're really excited about the next 2, and I'm going to highlight those now. Today, we'll be highlighting design principles to elevate equity, particularly focused on multifamily households and multifamily buildings. The next webinar will focus on community-based efficiency workforce and building up the workforce. The third webinar will be the role of utility regulators in this process and utilities. And so what should state energy offices and other stakeholders be asking of utilities and utility regulators in this process? And the final will be how to leverage all of these programs to braid and stack funding across a plethora of different funding programs to offer whole home comprehensive retrofits for low-income households. So again, with that, we'll kick off with our very first speaker, Sarah Baldwin with Energy Innovation. Sarah, please take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you everyone for being here today. I know everyone is very busy these days, so your time is much appreciated. As mentioned, I'm Sarah Baldwin. I'm the Senior Director of Electrification with Energy Innovation, which for those unfamiliar is a nonpartisan energy and environmental policy research firm. We provide research analysis and support to policymakers all over the world to help you make better and informed decisions about energy policy. I had the opportunity to collaborate with my colleague Tyler Polson with Collaborative Climate on a new resource to help state energy offices as you are implementing, designing, and executing these home energy rebate programs. Now, I know you guys are overwhelmed. We understand there is a lot on your plates and that the guidance for these programs is very dense. So my hope today with our presentation and with the resource we provided is to do 3 things for you. 1, give you confidence You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to come up with grand new solutions to problems that have actually been solved in many places already. There have been energy efficiency programs, electrification programs, low-income weatherization programs executed for decades. And we want you to draw on the successes and lessons learned from those programs and resources already there. Secondly, we want you to know that there are groups available to help you, like ours and those on the webinar, and many others in your state. So please don't feel like you're alone in this journey. And third, want to recognize that serving low to moderate income and multifamily housing is harder, and it will require some creativity and innovation and some thought leadership on your part to ensure that those who need resources the most to improve where they live get them and benefit from them. So with that, please go to the next slide. So as mentioned, we recently released this report, and it focuses on 7 program design principles. As I mentioned, it's really a combination of best practices and lessons learned from programs across the country. And we highlight the strategies and approaches in many of them that are already targeting these underserved markets. We provide a lot of resources and examples. I will highlight a couple for each of the principles here, but for time's sake, I'm not going to do all of them. Hope you'll download the report, take a closer look. And for those interested in kind of bigger picture, we also provide some policy recommendations that kind of go beyond just the program scope. And just as a disclaimer and to note, all of the guidance that we provided is absolutely supplementary to the DOE rules and requirements. So keeping that in mind, just want to make sure you're always checking those boxes. Next slide, please. So just quick recap. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but there are 2 programs we're talking about here today: the home electrification and appliance rebates. And I'm not going to go through all the details of those rebates, but effectively they are a combination of rebates that can be applied to help homes of lower income update old appliances, get new appliances, and there's a focus on the electric appliances as well as the electric upgrades that may be required. Next slide, please. And then there are the home efficiency rebates, which are much more comprehensive, and they focus on a whole home improvement via modeled or measured energy savings. And these are for single family, multifamily, and low income dwellings. Next slide, please. So the program design principles for effective home rebate programs are really a way to maybe simplify the complexity of some of these DOE guidance documents that you're reviewing and kind of extract a framework from which you can start working on designing the programs that you're going to be executing. And I'm going to go through each one of them in turn. So next slide, please. The first may seem obvious, but I really want to emphasize the importance of utilizing the data available to you to inform your program design and implementation strategies. Now, why? Why does that matter? Well, there are a lot of challenges in reaching underserved markets. So to the extent you have available social, technical, economic, census data, or other resources that can inform, not just geographic location, but the conditions under which many people are living, this will help you design programs and reach people where they live, where they are. And if you can collect this data and map it in a holistic way that layers income and equity and demographic components, this will allow you to kind of get a bigger picture of the folks we're really trying to target with these programs. So next slide, please. So as an example, GreenLeak Analytics provides equity maps and reports, and these are interactive reports, interactive maps. They're very cool. You can go in and they've mapped a handful of places already using census data. And, the example here is showing Charlotte, and you can kind of drill down and see, okay, how many households in this county have a certain amount of income, and furthermore, what's the energy burden of those in those counties? And the darker orange ones indicate folks who are very heavily energy burdened. What does that mean? They are paying way more for their energy bills on a ratio basis based on what they're earning. So these are the folks who really need help. So rather than go out and do flyers everywhere all over the county, maybe target the kind of sub districts where we can see that those resources can be most valuable and most helpful. They do a great job of quantifying the equity challenges, and they also do a lot to illustrate the opportunities to improve affordability, comfort, and health. So great resource. Next slide. And I just saw a question, and the Green Lakes Analytics tool is, I'm not sure if they have done this for all states. That's a question to ask them, but they do have a number on their website. Second principle here, setting clear objectives and key results and adopting some really tangible metrics to track the progress that you're going to be required to report. Now, again, may seem very common sense, but this piece of the puzzle is going to be your foundation for a strong program. And involving some diverse stakeholders in the process can help you really adopt goals that are specific to what you're trying to accomplish. And making sure in the administrative component of the program, you're allocating sufficient resources to actually track and report on these different metrics. And then, over time, evolving targets and goals. If you're seeing that things are not going as planned and the goals are not being met, probably a good time to reevaluate. Do you need to update or modify or switch gears? Next slide, please. So a great resource available to you all, developed by the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, Equity in Buildings, Practical Framework for Local Decision Makers. This is for local governments, but I think it's very applicable to state governments as well. They talk a lot about how to actually set goals in the equity context and how to design programs effectively with equity kind of central to the programs as opposed to peripheral. And they offer a ton of strategies for community engagement and government coordination and metric setting that can help keep folks on track with those goals. So great resource. And honestly, the USDN is doing great work across the board on this topic. So reach out and connect with them. They want to help on these things. Next slide, please. Third, adopting strategic marketing and outreach strategies to reach target audiences. Now, I'm guessing most folks that work at state energy offices are not marketing professionals. This is not something that you've necessarily done a ton of work on. But the good news is there are a lot of folks who have, and they have studied and executed successful programs across the country. One key component that we often see is the partnership with trusted organizations and messengers and the coordination with other programs that may already be in play. The key thing here is that your marketing and outreach should not just be a nice website that looks fancy, but actual tools to help participants and contractors navigate program eligibility, enrollment, and facilitating easy connections, making it simple as possible. Next slide, please. A great example from the Building Decarbonization Coalition is the Switches On campaign. It's based in California, and they have a really excellent website that they've translated into, I think, 7+ languages. So, there's already an equity component built in by being able to access information in different languages. That's really important. It's a one-stop shop, so you don't have to go to 5 different links and 5 different websites and get kind of strewn all over the internet. It's all right there, easy to access. They have trained contractors ready to connect with people. They assist renters in multifamily buildings and landlords. They have income qualifying components and programs that help folks with additional resources beyond what they have to offer. So it's a really great resource. Encourage you to go check it out and see how they've done it. Next slide, please. And thanks for putting the link in there, Chase, in the chat. Okay, fourth, providing this hands-on support to consumers and contractors. This builds on what I just said. But effectively, we all know if you live in a place, you need help. Very few people are DIY handy people. Navigating simple things like, your water heater goes out, your HVAC system is on the fritz, your windows are leaking, whatever, you need help. And so keeping in mind that the success of these programs is really going to be based in how helpful the program is to helping people navigate the process and then get to the end. One thing we've seen that's been very successful is harnessing the power of peer-to-peer connections. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next example. But to the extent you can really get specific and address different housing types, different strategies for different housing types and the stakeholders that exist within them is going to be really important instead of a kind of, a blanket approach that may not really serve folks who say have 2 jobs and they're working, the 9 to 5 and the 5 to 8. How are we reaching these people? These are the people that need the support. So next slide, please. Really cool example out of Philadelphia is the Energy Coordinating Agency. They have these neighborhood energy centers, and these centers exist in the community. People can literally walk in the door and connect with trusted advisors on an array of energy and home support. They provide access to experts on hand to help navigate, application processes, and maybe with people who don't have internet in their homes, they can, do it on site. So this may be above and beyond what you can accomplish in your state energy office, but think about, again, partnering with those community organizations and community centers in your state to facilitate some great synergistic opportunities here. Next slide, please. Another cool example, and this is the peer-to-peer support that I was referring to. Massachusetts has come up with a really innovative way to help people with heat pumps, and they've got these heat pump coaches. So these are people who have adopted heat pumps in their own homes, and they've volunteered to go and speak with their peers who ask for support. They kind of function like an energy coach, kind of answering the questions, supporting the process. They're not doing the heat pump installation, let's be clear, but they are empowering people through the standard way that we do a lot of things in our lives, through friends, family, neighbors, and trusted advisors who, they're not trying to sell anything. They're just literally there to help. So really cool example. And they've been able to scale heat pump adoption in Massachusetts in incredible ways. So another good one to check out. Next slide, please. Okay, number 5, make it economically beneficial where possible to adopt efficient and all-electric technologies. And we have to have some protections to insulate vulnerable customers from bill increases. And I know the other colleagues on this panel will speak more to some of these facets. But first and foremost, this is about an education up front and a clear communication about the economics. Not everyone speaks energy wonk, and people are often confused when numbers are thrown at them about this, that, and the other kilowatt hour and BTUs and therms and so on and so forth. So to the extent you can support and enable some simple tools and resources that speak to the economics and help do side-by-side comparisons, that's going to be really helpful. Next slide, please. So the example I'll pull out here is Efficiency Maine. They have a really cool heat pump comparison calculator where you can drop in and say, okay, this is how I heat my home. This is what I think I'm going to replace. And then it'll churn out some estimates and some numbers. And this is something that's going to be useful for a lot of folks, but can help also dispel some of the myths around what will happen if you adopt a heat pump in certain areas. So I'm going to go to the next slide and I will wrap it up here, Mark. Thanks for the cue. I'll definitely give a shout out to the ACEEE folks for all the resources they have, but they have a great resource that speaks specifically to combining building envelope improvements with electrification as a way to do a whole home improvement, not just comfort, but also maximizing the savings and maximizing the electrification appliances and their function. Next slide, please. And 6, this really speaks to the importance of quality assurance. So we don't want a bunch of fly-by-night contractors coming in, doing crappy work, and then people have bad experiences. We want this to be very, very positive for both contractors and the households that are being served. And there are a couple ways to do that. Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into each of these points, but the report speaks more in detail about this point. So I'll go to the next slide and give you the example. So Rocky Mountain Power is actually my electric utility. They have a trade ally program. So it's a really cool way to get contractors connected with people in the areas where they live. And these contractors are vetted by the utility themselves because they're providing efficiency rebate programs to these customers. And they provide online training and ongoing training for contractors. And that helps build this kind of holistic contractor environment that's easy to access for consumers. Next slide, and this will be my last. Finally, this is the big picture. Support durable market momentum and business model evolution. You want to work very closely with the workforce and the industries that are going to be supporting these installations, these programs, because this is the long term. We're not just doing this for a year or two. This is a 10-year program. We want to make sure that the workforce serving folks are not just there to get a kickback, but are actually evolving their businesses and their training and their entire workforce so that they can deliver exceptional retrofit solutions. And it's important to address the full supply chain. And next slide, and this one will be my last. NYSERDA, for example, in New York, Clean Heat Connect, they have a great program that's really about building the connections to the heat pump distributors, the manufacturers. They offer training and tools. They have in-person events to maximize the networking benefits. They're really evolving the workforce through an organic approach that leverages the full supply chain. So another great program to take a look at. And with that, next slide, I think that will be my last. And thank you so much. Happy to answer any questions at any time, and I'll turn it back to Mark.
Thank you, Sarah. And go ahead and move Nick to the RMI slides. Our next speaker will be Srinidhi Sampath Kumar from RMI's Carbon Free Building Program. Srinidhi, take it away. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi. As Mark just said, my name is Srinidhi Sampath Kumar, pronounced as Trinity with a S. I'll be specifically talking about ensuring access to multifamily affordable rental housing, largely rent-restricted homes. So there is a crucial distinction there. So really just focus on the rental homes piece of this. And next slide, please. We have a quick Zoom poll, and then I'll be providing some context as why we are all trying to focus on multifamily here and why rental multifamily specifically. And then I'll also be talking about incentive levels and structure, and also really around like the financing aspect of it, outreach and technical assistance, and broader best practices for the sector. Next slide, please. So if we can have the poll up, Nick. So the first question is, if you're a state energy office, if you could please answer this question, are you planning to submit an application to DOE by Q1 2024 for the program? If you're specifically applying for the Quick Start grants, if you can flag it to one of us or put it in the chat if you feel like you can, please let us know. But this is the first question. Are you planning to submit an application Q1 2024? Moving on to the second question. If you are planning to apply for the program, are you considering exceeding the 40% set aside for serving Justice 40 communities? Okay, closing the poll right now. We'll definitely see the results and share it with them if we got any. But if you have or planning to apply for the Quick Start grants, please let any of us on the panelist or the host know. We would love to talk to you. We want to know what's going on. Moving on to the next slide. Why are we talking about multifamily affordable housing? So here are some of the snapshots and challenges. So there's a shortage of about 7 million affordable housing homes, and that number has actually gone up by 8% since 2019. We all knew there was a global pandemic, and it really displaced a lot of people from stable income and housing. So that also added to the housing crisis. And we've seen the news over many, many years right now making front pages across different cities and different states, how bad the crisis is. And as you see on the graph here, even homes that have been historically affordable, there is a risk that almost 300,000 units will lose their affordability restriction within the next 4 years. And so that's a pretty damning picture for a lot of affordable housing owners on the call and elsewhere. So what does this all mean for residents? Sarah covered this. Multifamily affordable housing residents face some of the highest energy burden. According to an ACEEE study done more recently, it's almost twice as likely that they're energy burdened as a regular multifamily affordable housing resident. They also face some of the highest rent burden. 70% of extremely low income residents, that's about people earning 30% below area median income, are rent burden, which means they're paying more than 50% of their income on rents. And HUD's best practice and the general guidance is that you don't pay more than 30%. These housing stock are extremely old. A lot of them, I was talking to an owner just yesterday, and he was talking about how many of the properties in his portfolio are running on a deficit, which means they don't have a steady operating income to even make some of the basic upgrades that are needed in this home. So as we are thinking about program implementation and planning, we should be thinking about holistically upgrading these buildings. So really just focusing on energy efficiency or electrification could miss the mark. So thinking about like mold, asbestos, all the other work that's needed in the house is really, really critical. Next slide, please. As I said, why are we focusing on multifamily rental housing now? So there's a large gap in funding for both producing and preserving low-income affordable homes. But most crucially, many of the Inflation Reduction Act provisions actually don't cover these sectors. Lower income residents can't apply for a lot of provisions on this. So these rebates are extremely crucial that they are designed well and are targeting the sector. And there is also a historical gap in energy efficiency program that serve the sector. We all know the weatherization assistance program, but in a lot of states, they don't reach multifamily residents. And most of the policy levers that exist in multifamily are done at the state level, which means there is no clear policy signal around higher efficiency or emissions reductions target. So states can do a lot with these dollars to ensure these homes are both affordable, but are also extremely sustainable and efficient so that people are actually not spending as much energy cost on their units. They also have a very unique financing mechanism. It's very complicated, very wonky, and affordable housing owners really struggle to navigate a lot of like financing mandates that come with some of the state and federal housing financing deals that they make. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? How do we make this better? So first, I'll talk about the incentive levels and structure. On the right, we already know what the DOE calls for, which is a 10% minimum set aside for multifamily housing, and then really calling for higher rebate levels for low-income residents. They haven't said exactly what that is, so states have a lot of discretion there. And then common area measures are also eligible, which is extremely important for multifamily homes. So SEOs should generally consider a prioritization approach with higher set-asides focusing on this sector. So especially now with the more recent guidance, they've said that many of these rebates can be retroactively applied for projects that are done last year. So in the absence of having clear prioritization and set-asides, we risk a lot of these dollars not reaching this community and other low-income communities. So also being extremely clear about what are some of the administrative cost, implementation cost, and what is the actual rebate amount. That is very necessary when you're going out and implementing a program. You should be able to comfortably tell, okay, this is the rebate dollar that's available. So having that clarity both as program implementers, but also as owners is important when they're actually planning some of their financing deals. Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future recently did an analysis on what this set-aside means by state, and really doesn't go very far. So really identifying funding gaps after all the various IRA provisions are implemented and seeing if states and localities can come and match some of the funding, either through utility programs, and really thinking about it more comprehensively is going to be very, very important. Some states have also set up tariff on bill financing. It's not the same as on bill financing. So really thinking about alternatives to traditional funding opportunities for this sector will also be really important. As I said, states have a higher discretion in terms of offering higher rebate amounts to this sector. So right now, if there is a property that's where 50% of the residents meet 80% of area median income, then they qualify as low income, which means they get the lesser of $8,000 or 80% of the overall project cost. But really, states can go significantly higher on what that means. The last one, and this is extremely important, is offering these rebates and structuring them as loans. This is more of like being really flexible on what that means. Is low-income housing tax credits, which finance most of the subsidized affordable housing, is the core way affordable housing in the country gets produced and preserved. LIHTCs are allocated to developers and are sold to investors, and they give the investors a dollar for dollar reduction based on the federal tax liability that they have. Usually, all these rebates are considered grants under the tax credit deal, and they're also treated as taxable income, which means they reduce the amount of tax credits that affordable housing so badly relies on. So it really just making sure that there is flexibility in offering these rebates as loans is going to be important. There are two programs, one in Massachusetts and one in New York, that already does it and offer like really good models, and we can provide more language on that. Next slide, please. Overall, the crux of this is aligning with existing multifamily housing financing system. And that means being extremely flexible for one-off scenarios. I've worked on program implementation before, and really just making sure that there is flexibility at every step of the way for affordable housing to be able to take advantage of this is really crucial. And one of the first fundamental ways this can be done is really streamlining the income verification process. The documents that are required and the forms that affordable housing owners need to file with state and federal agencies are really cumbersome, which means they're already collecting every bit of data that is needed to prove gross rent and also to show income levels of residents that are living in the properties. I've done a program where I've had to go into homes to collect those income documents, and none of us need so many papers. And really, so doing a very streamlined income documentation through showing that through deed restrictive documents is going to be extremely important. So really, that's just one document where owners can say, together, my entire property can comply with this income eligibility that the DOE put out. And most of them do, because a lot of them house anywhere below 50% AMI residents. So that's going to be important. And the asterisk there is to say a lot of homes sometimes don't have a very clear deed restriction document because they're going through acquisition rehab or a gut rehab. So in those cases, you can ask for other documents. Then also aligning the rebate timing with the resyndication process. It takes 15 years for properties to go through resyndication, and it takes 4 years for most of them to plan it. So from the design phase to the implementation phase, there's like almost a 4-year timeline, at which point they need to clearly know what income sources exist for them, which means they need a longer lead time to plan and prepare for these. So really allowing for that. A lot of them also, as I said, lack upfront capital. So really phasing in these rebate payments over like 2 or 3 installments is going to be extremely critical. And this is not just for owners. I've also heard this from several contractors on the field where they don't have, especially small and medium contractors, don't have that level of funding to just go and do a program. So if we really want this program to be implemented equitably, really thinking about phased rebate payments, offering upfront payment, one during completion, or thinking about it more as like 3 phased payments. Next slide, please. A lot of this was covered by Sarah, so I'm going to try and keep really, really quickly. I would say really utilize multifamily affordable housing organization in your program implementation team. They know the sector, they know who's working, and they also know the financing really well. So really making sure they're part of the team is going to be very important. coordinating with state and local housing agencies. A lot of times they're completely unaware of some of the sustainability programs that are there. And really using them as a resource to market some of these programs is also going to be extremely critical in terms of, and looping them during the design phase. And then Sarah went into the details of it around like stacking federal, state, and utility incentives, really creating one-stop shops. And Switches On was a great example. There are other programs doing it. And several states are now considering legislation for a one-stop shop model. But a lot of IRA funds can be used towards creating something like that. The last one I'd say here is just really, really coordinating with utilities to get data. For both the measured and the model saving approach, we really need data, and we need it in a timely fashion so things are moving along. And if there is any holdup there, it's going to really hurt some of these projects. So really making sure that ahead of time, there is a contract signed with utilities to ensure that there is extremely streamlined coordination between the implementers, the owners, and the utilities should be done ahead of time. Last two slides, one is on technical assistance. The next is just providing comprehensive TA. So really helping with energy audits, really understanding the needs in the property, finding the right qualified contractor. DOE says that you have to publish a qualified contractor list, but in a lot of cases, these programs, housing finance programs, already require properties to come with at least 3 different codes. So really helping them get those codes and figuring out who the right contractor is, and making sure that, you know, they're able to identify the right contractor, the right equipment, sizing them appropriately. The last one I would say here is just there is a high turnover of property management staff in affordable housing. So making sure that they're trained, but there is also a manual in place. So when there is a turnover, people are still able to like use some of these appliances and know how to troubleshoot it themselves without relying on an external warranty is, again, very, very important. Again, Sylvia is going to cover on like resident training, but really making sure that these are newer appliances. Most owners and residents don't have the bandwidth to manage an appliance or an equipment that's new. So really thinking about it through that lens is important. My last slide is broadly on other best practices. Sylvia is going to go into almost all of them. I'll just say that really putting tenant needs front and center is going to be extremely important as we're like thinking about the program. And also, I wanted to spotlight one of the program I've worked on, which is called the Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing. And the reason I'm bringing that up is they have a program advisory council, and they have CBOs and affordable housing organizations on the implementation team that are paid to do some of the outreach work. And where I saw so much value in it is when COVID hit and a lot of projects couldn't move forward, we were able to more quickly change the way we were working the program because of the feedback we were receiving on the ground. So really thinking about it from different perspectives and making sure it's holistically designed is going to be very crucial for the success of it. RMI is putting together a multifamily program design template for the rebates, and we are planning to share it with NASIO and all the other state energy offices very, very soon. So within a month's time. And if you're interested, please flag it to us, but we'll anyway be doing outreach for that. And we've done this in consultation with experts from across the multifamily industry and program implementers. So we really hope that's going to be useful. I'll pass it on to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trinity. Our final speaker will be Sylvia Chi from the Just Solutions Collective. Sylvia, take it away.
Hey, everyone. Good morning. I'm happy to be here and glad to be in such great company with Sarah and Trinity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the ways to do equitable approaches to these rebate programs, and that'll include talking about Justice 40 and community benefits. Next slide. So just a quick intro about my organization, Just Solutions. We're a national climate justice organization, and we work with BIPOC-led frontline organizations around the country, especially in terms of providing research and policy capacity support, and also trying to elevate and spread the word about solutions that come from these communities, including the Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing program that Trinity just mentioned. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a bit about some highlights from the application as outlined by DOE and their guidance. And we're going to look at 4 specific sections in the application: the low-income homes section, the education and outreach strategy, the consumer protection plan, and the community benefits plan. So these aren't the entirety of the application, but these are some of the sections that I think have the most potential for trying to get equity outcomes out of. Next slide. So as has been mentioned, the requirements from DOE about low-income homes include a set-aside for the percentage of households in your state that are low income. So in all of the states, it's about 40%. Sometimes it ranges to like 40.1 or 39.8, but roughly 40% in each state needs to be of the rebate funding needs to be set aside for low income households. And then in addition to that, there's another set aside of at least 10% of the funding for multifamily buildings. And then for all of the low income homes requirements, there's this tenant protections piece as well. And there's a lot of different parts of that, but basically for at least 2 years, there's all these protections have to apply as well, including like it has to maintain affordability. They have to rent to a low income tenant and agree not to increase the rent, etc. Next slide. So in addition to like meeting those requirements, we have some recommendations for folks to consider as you're working on implementation. Definitely consider whether you can increase the percentage allocations above the 40% or the 10%, and or see if you can prioritize certain sectors such as low-income households or multifamily buildings. It could be really helpful in a lot of places if the state energy office could develop standard agreements and other legal instruments to help implement those tenant protections. Another way to help facilitate those tenant protections and make sure they're effective is to maintain a rental registry and a mechanism such as a hotline for tenants to report violations of those tenant protections. Also, like partnering with and referring tenants to legal services providers to make sure that like enforcement of those protections happens. Finding and prohibiting landlords that violate the protections from participating in future programs that the State Energy Office administers. Providing temporary relocation assistance if needed for renters who are affected. And then also extending the protections beyond 2 years is another recommendation we have. Next slide. So there's also an education and outreach strategy part of the application, and Sarah talked about this a bit as well. The guidance requirements are not very detailed about this, but they basically just say that the state energy offices have to include a timeline and programmatic elements, and there needs to be descriptions about what the activities are planned for household outreach as well as for contractor outreach. So those are the 2 big categories. Next slide. And so we have some recommendations for each piece. For household outreach, funded partnerships with community-based organizations that are trusted in low-income and disadvantaged communities can be very effective. A very effective way to reach the audience you're trying to reach. And in addition to that, targeted outreach channels for residents in those communities, especially in language media, which can also be extremely cost effective. Providing educational materials in languages that are prevalent in your state's limited English proficiency populations. And then basically the same sorts of approaches would also apply for contractor outreach. Again, targeted outreach channels, and then providing materials, including training and educational materials in other languages. And like Trinity and Sarah mentioned, coordinating with utility programs, also in state and local incentives, would go a long way in terms of outreach. Next slide. Consumer protection plan is another big part of the application. There's actually a lot in the guidance about what's required. So this is not, what's on the slide is not comprehensive. The DOE's approach to this is focused on quality assurance. And the way they talk about it in the guidance, they say quality assurance is dealing with systems that are designed to meet consumer expectations and to ensure consumer satisfaction. And so they say the consumer protection plan has to include QA features. And this is also a part of the plan, part of the application that needs to get DOE approval at least 60 days before the planned program launch. The plan itself also has to be readily accessible to program participants and has to be reviewed every 2 years and adjusted based on lessons learned. And then there are a number of required elements, including the qualified contractor list and some installation standards and enforcement mechanisms. Next slide. Some of the recommendations we have for the consumer protection plan include creating a transparent mechanism for feedback from consumers throughout the implementation process. I think the transparency part of it is very key to make sure that there's trust in the system and to just encourage effectiveness. And then establishing an advisory council of community-based organizations, direct services providers, and consumer protection experts to provide recommendations. And then qualified contractor lists should ensure standards for cultural competency, using energy modeling software to avoid energy bill increases, and training households on using and troubleshooting new equipment. Next slide. And then the community benefits plan. That's another big part of the application. So this is also not comprehensive in terms of what's on the slide. There's much more in the guidance. So the community benefits plan has, it's required to have one SMART milestone per calendar year, and SMART stands for specific, measurable, etc. I forget all the letters right now, but they're in the guidance. And the plan, the community benefits plan itself, and the milestones and the progress towards those milestones have to be publicly available on a website. And like the consumer protection plan, this community benefits plan must also be submitted and approved by DOE before launch. And I think the that transparency requirement of having the plan and the progress of the plan publicly available is a really great requirement of DOE. So that helps the public kind of keep track of how things are going in terms of actually providing benefits to the communities. The plan components, there are 4 main components to the plan. Community and labor engagement is a really important one. That includes holding at least one public input session and then using that input to inform program design. That's a great requirement because it suggests that like you can't just have a public input session as a like box checking exercise. You actually have to show how you integrate the feedback. You're also required to solicit and respond to feedback throughout the program and identify strategies to reach contractor and workforce organizations, disadvantaged communities, and low-income households. There's also a component around skilled and qualified workforce. and DEIA, which is like diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and then Justice 40. And Justice 40, for those who don't know, is the Biden administration's initiative to, it's a goal to provide benefits from certain climate investments for those benefits to flow to disadvantaged communities. And disadvantaged communities basically is a term of art for environmental justice communities. And so in the community benefits plan, in the Justice 40 section of the plan, the state energy office has to provide their definition of disadvantaged communities and talk about their method of encouraging delivery of rebates to those communities and how the state will ensure that benefits flow to those communities. Next slide. So our recommendations for this include having more than one public input session with language access, because that's not specified in the guidance, but definitely having more than one would make it more accessible. Partner with trusted community-based organizations to co-design the program offerings, do direct implementation where that's possible, and conduct outreach, as well as to recruit participants into workforce training programs. For the DEIA component, we just provided an example of an objective, and that could be that 40% of projects are installed by minority, women, or disadvantaged business entities or cooperatives with high road standards. Another recommendation we have for Justice 40 is to use the administrative funding that's available for these programs to develop a state environmental justice screening tool for those states that don't have one yet, especially those that are already exploring that, maybe have just completed a study about it. This is a great way to use federal funding to help put that into practice. We also recommend prioritizing or creating additional set-asides for those EJ communities, or you can do different cross-sections like renters or specifically high energy burden households. You could also look at targeting wait lists for similar programs. So there might be other energy assistance programs in your state that are oversubscribed. You can go to them, the folks on that list first to offer rebates. And then we also recommend making the J40 goal a publicly reported milestone. And that's just 'cause like that particular goal, that's not specifically required as part of the community benefits plan, but we think that would be a great way to encourage accountability and transparency. And then in terms of income verification, they're allowed to do categorical eligibility, and there's a list of federal programs that categorical eligibility applies to, but state energy offices are also allowed to allow for self-attestation as a method of income verification. So we recommend doing that possibly in combination with like random audits after the fact to like confirm the reliability of that. But that is just another way to make the program more accessible. Next slide. I think that's it for me, so I will pass it back and look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. We will now move to the Q&A session. Let me kick it off here with maybe one that came up multiple different times related to how do you make sure that households are not displaced, or I know we talked a little bit about tenant protections, but does anybody want to expand a little bit more on kind of tenant protections, displacement? It's come up probably 3 or 4 different times in the questions. Sylvia, Trinity, Sarah, anybody want to speak more to avoiding displacement?
I can grow, and Sylvia mentioned a lot of it in their presentation. Really, just DOE just calls for 2 years, and I thought that like some of the strategies that mentioned was really strong, but 2 years is really nothing, and states should really go beyond thinking beyond 2 years, as Sylvia just mentioned. And some of the programs, like the low-income weatherization program and solar on multifamily affordable housing program, LIBOR requires affordability covenants, and so requires that you already have 10 years left in the deed to even apply for the program. But in both the cases, there is no monitoring, and you actually don't know what's happening on the ground after the program is actually implemented, which actually poses a lot of risk. And Daniel, I also shared the report from SAGE, which has been really, really powerful and has created a lot of interesting movement in California. And several states, including California, considered a rental registry bill that didn't pass, and also rent protection bill tied to specific program implementation. So really, states do have a lot of authority in designing and monitoring. And this is a really good opportunity for states to go back and say, we are going to monitor what happens. Even doing a random monitoring and random sampling could be really, really powerful in holding different, having some accountability. And we can also have clawback requirements. So if there is like a violation of some of them, then rebates can be clawed back. And this was actually proposed by an implementer. So I think that's really good to know that even implementers are thinking about it, and that can happen.
Thank you so much. On income verification, does anybody want to speak more to best practices on income verification?
I'm not an expert on this. I think this can get really technical really fast, but the categorical eligibility is meant to make things simpler. So I would definitely recommend looking in that direction. There is also I know there's a Rewiring America memo that is a great resource that talks about this in more detail, and we can drop the link to that as well.
Yeah, I did share it in the Q&A, and I can't remember who asked the question. It was Stephen McShane, but I can put it in the chat here.
All right, thank you. Well, we've reached the time to conclude this first webinar. I want to thank Sylvia, Trinity, and Sarah, each of you so much for sharing your perspectives. I want to encourage everyone to attend the next few webinars. Again, they will occur each of the next Thursdays at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Really appreciate all of the organizations that have pulled together to organize this webinar. Most of all, I want to appreciate and thank the state energy offices who are going through this very challenging and difficult but exciting opportunity to get funding to those who need it most, especially affordable housing, multifamily housing, and others. With that, look forward to following up with any additional questions. We got a lot in the chat and in the Q&A. We will do our best to follow up with this. We will share the videos and the slides from everyone, and we will again reach out about the upcoming webinars. So don't hesitate to contact any of us for assistance. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. Good luck, and we look forward to hearing you again in a week. Thank you.